Welcome back. Let's jump into creating the login screen to log into Epic Online Services. First, let's open the third-person game mode and parent it to the game mode, not game mode base, as game mode is more suited for multiplayer than game mode base. If you hover over it, you can read the game mode description, which states that it's more suited for multiplayer than game mode base. Now let's rename it to BP_EIK_parent game mode. This will be the parent class for all our game modes. Now in core folder, create a parent classes folder. Move EIK parent game mode to parent classes folder. Make sure to fix up redirectors after any move of files. We need to create few more parent classes. Right-click on Empty Content Browser Space to add Blueprint class. We definitely need a player controller, as this class is responsible for the player who controls the player character. Name it BP_EIK_parent player controller. The next class we need to add is the player state. This class is great for storing player-specific data, such as the player nickname, and so on. To find it, search in all classes. Don't forget to save, as Unreal is prone to crashing. Now let's create our child class from our parent game mode for our menu game mode. In the parent class, we will store EIK-related Blueprint functionality so that it will be accessible in all child classes. To create child class, right-click on Parent Class and select Create Child Blueprint Class. Name it Menu Game Mode. This class will be used for our staging map for the login screen and our game menu. Also create child from EIK Player Controller and name it Menu Player Controller. Select both menu classes and move to core folder. Now, in our staging levels world settings, set the game mode override to our menu game mode. In selected game mode for player controller, set our menu player controller. Make sure to save all changes. Now let's add a game instance class to our core folder. The game instance is a persistent class that is created when the game is launched and exists until the game is shut down. It's a great class to hold our core game logic, such as the login logic. Name it BP_game instance. To add it to our project, go to Edit and Project Settings. Here in Maps and Modes tab, set our created game instance. Now let's start building our login screen logic bit by bit. Open Menu Player Controller and go to Event Graph. I don't want this tutorial series to be just do this and do that, even if sometimes it's inevitable. However, when I can, I will explain how Unreal Engine works as my knowledge allows. The Menu Player Controller has the event Begin Play, like many other Blueprint classes. This event triggers when this class is created or constructed. Let's add a print string node to showcase it. If we launch our staging map now, it will print hello on our screen. This is because we have the game mode set with this player controller class within the game mode. Now open our game instance class. Here, as I mentioned previously, we will add our login logic for the game. Right-click on an empty spot in the event graph and add a custom event to our graph. Name it Login to EOS. This is our custom event that we trigger when we want to log into EOS. And where we want it to trigger? Well, in our menu player controller Begin Play. Now, the usual step in a YouTube tutorials is to get the game instance. And from game instance cast to our custom BP game instance. And from BP game instance, get our login to EOS event. Casting is not always bad, but but it creates dependencies and can cost resources. The usual approach is to use a blueprint interface to trigger our event in the game instance that has that interface. Let's create Interfaces folder in our Blueprints folder. In Interfaces folder, add Blueprint Interface and name it BPI_Game Instance Interface. And here in the Game Instance Interface, we create our login to EOS function. Compile and go to the game instance. We can delete our custom event, as we will implement the interface function as an event. To implement it, go to Class Settings and add our interface in the Implemented Interfaces section. Double-click on Login to EOS Interface, and it will be implemented as event. Now we can search for this interface and call it without casting to our custom game instance. If game instance have this interface implemented, it will trigger it. One more thing before we move ahead. This is a child class, but we might add some logic to our parents begin play, so we need to trigger our parents begin play first. To quickly navigate to our parent class, you can click magnifying glass, and it will bring you to it. So here in our EIK parent player controller, we will most likely have some logic that we want all child classes to run. To do that, in our menu player controller right, click on Event Begin Play and Add Call to Parent Function. We need to do one more thing before we proceed. Add a function to check if the player controller is local, and add a branch for it. Only run Login to EOS if it is the local player controller. This ensures that this event won't trigger on the server, but only on the client. We can close our menu controller now, as we are done here for the time being. Let's do print string to check if all the chain of event works as expected. And it does. I hope you are still following the chain. The level opens, it has the set game mode, which has our menu controller set. This controller calls the game instance interface to trigger our login event. And now, let's add our login logic. There are two ways to log into EOS. One is to log in using Connect interface, and the other is to log in using Authentication interface. The Connect interface is the most basic and easiest way to authenticate users. This method is used when you want to authenticate your users without using Epic Account Services. As this method does not use Epic Account Services, the user will not be able to use some features like overlay, invites, etc. Auth interface is the more advanced way to authenticate your users and would be used when you want to authenticate your users using Epic Account Services. Now let's combine all our login logic into one macro function to keep everything under one hood. Name this macro login using EIK. Open it and let's start tweaking it to our needs. First, drag execute pin to our inputs to create execute pin for our macro. To disconnect a pin, you can hold Alt and left-click the pin. Drag the pin that is called then to the output node. Here, you see that the input pin is called execute and the output one called then. In the inputs, we need to add a Boolean to switch between login interfaces. Name it useAuth interface. Add a branch for our Boolean. So if useAuth is true, we will use the login using the authentication interface. And if it's false, we will use the connect interface. We need our macro have some of inputs from login interfaces that we want to use, like credential type from auth interface. Drag it to our inputs node of our macro. We most likely won't be using any external credential types for now, but if you want to log in with Steam and also utilize Epic Account Services, you can log in the client with the authentication interface. The user will be prompted to link their Epic account or create one. But we might use token for other login methods that require it, so let's add that to our inputs. We can reuse token input variable for the connect interface. This is how our macro looking now. This is what we will use to log into EOS using EIK nodes. Here, we will set our credential type if we check that we are using the authentication interface. However, we also need to add the inputs for our Connect interface if we utilize it to login. Drag login method from Connect interface to our input node. We also will need display name for some login methods, so add it also. Our macro might seem clunky, but it utilizes everything we need from both login interfaces, and we will use it to determine which login method we want to use without creating separate functions for each one. We can set the login method to device ID, and this requires the display name to not be empty. Macro inputs will pass those settings to our Connect interface node. The Login Connect interface has its own outputs that determine if the login was successful and can provide us with an error message if it fails to log in. We will want to utilize those outputs. To do so, add print text node and drag from text and add format text function. We can change color to red for our error message print. You can drag selected color to save it for later uses. Make duration of print 5 seconds. In format input type, failed to login using method, error. Put method and error in curly brackets to create input pins for those values. Connect print text to on fail pin and drag error string to our format text error input. Drag login method and search for the text byte to convert enum to text. Unfortunately, we can't reuse the print text for the failure of the authentication interface, as it unpins the error from the Connect interface. We could use some select nodes, but since it's not trivial, we can just copy and paste to reuse the print text for the authentication interface. Let's connect our macro to our login to EOS event. Remove display name just to see our error message in action. It works partially. It printed the error message, but the login method was an enumerator ranking, not the name of it. To fix it, we need to convert enum to string. Now it should print enumerator name, not rank. Now it prints device ID, login method, and EOS error. Now add any value to the display name, and we should log into EOS. We received no error message, so we successfully logged in, but nothing happens because we have no continuation for that matter. Select the print text with its inputs and duplicate it to create a print text for a successful login. Change text color to green. Change message to logged in using method and delete error part of text. Connect our print text to on success pin. Let's actually change output pin to success and add one more for failure. To change pins, you can hover over the pin hold the Control key and drag it with a left click to the failure pin. Now connect on success print text to our success output. Sometimes the web of nodes and blueprints can become messy, and even the Blueprint Assist plugin can't handle it. Make sure to connect login method enum to our print text. Just ignore the mess and copy and paste the success print text to our authentication interface. Then this macro will be complete, and we won't need to return to this macro to see this mess. What a mess of nodes. We could certainly tidy it up, but we're already 15 minutes in and still have no proper login screen in sight. As long as it works, it's just a mess of print strings. Let's see if it works. And it does. We got success pin that we logged in using device ID. Now let's use auth interface to log in using Epic account using account portal. And the account portal opens. If you're already logged into your Epic account in your browser, you will see this screen pop up. For now, all good. Let's create proper login screen in next part.